It's like the longest minute ever. Okay, so it's live. Testing, testing. Just gonna see if we're live on the thing. Yeah, it's not live. Alexa?
She's gone and I'm on the show.
See, maybe that's why the delay happened.
Is Jesse communicating with you?
Yeah, he says it's live.
Well, we better just start talking then.
Okay, I'm just gonna send a picture so he can see. Okay, well, we'll just assume that we're live. Good morning, beautiful souls. I'm your host, Angela Ahimsa, broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario. And you are watching Jesse TV, streaming worldwide on Roku, Meta, NCG Television Network, and of course, jessefm.ca. And let me tell you, today we're about to tap into something truly deep, inspiring, and transformational. Today, joining us is Guy Crittenden, who is a celebrated journal author, a book editor, and the recipient of unmatched 14th Kenneth R. Wilson Awards for Excellence in Business Journalism. His groundbreaking book, The Year of Drinking Magic, 12 Ceremonies with the Vine of Souls, recounts his early experiences with Amazonian plants, shamanism, and earned a silver medal in the 2018 Independent Publisher Book Awards. I read that book and it is very, very good. Guy currently lives in Bracebridge, Ontario, and he and his wife Vanessa run a sound therapy and holistic health practice where he serves as a board member for the annual Soulshine Festival. You can connect with him at thewritingsage.com. So grab your coffee or your tea and bring your chi and your curiosity, because this episode of Feed Your Chakras is called The Vine of Souls and Guy Crittenden on Earth, Ego Death, and Exiting the Matrix. So it's going to be illuminating, expansive, and absolutely one to remember. And Guy, I know that you weren't always on this path. I met you about 9 years ago when you were a little borderline hippie crashing my kirtan ceremony. But prior to this awakening that you had, tell me a little bit about what your life was like prior to this version of Guy Crittenden.
Well, thank you, by the way, for inviting me on the show. It's I feel honored to be on the first episode, and I will be sharing this with any of my friends who weren't able to catch the live version here. Yeah, I'm a person from Toronto, and I grew up in a newspaper family. So both my father and my mother, and also my stepmother and stepfather, all met each other when they were working at the Toronto Telegram, which was one of the big broadsheet dailies in Toronto back in the day. I was born in 1960, and the world was a very different place in that time. So I grew up, during the course of my life, I'll be turning 65 this fall, I've seen us go from through these technological changes and cultural changes from the analog world and the old black and white televisions. And I remember color TV was kind of a big thing. It may have existed in other households, but it took a while for us to get it. In fact, I remember the first time I ever saw color TV. My mom took me on a trip to Florida with my sister, and we were staying at a little place in Fort Lauderdale. My father wasn't on that trip, so I think it was one of those trips where their marriage was becoming a little rocky. And I remember the vivid colors of these cartoons on the television set, because it was the first time as a little kid. I have no idea how old I was, but I was very young seeing that. And to think of the world we're in today, which we'll discuss a little later, I'm sure. Anyway, I always resisted going into the family business. When the telly folded, my stepdad was one of the founders of the Toronto Sun, which became a newspaper chain. So he became very wealthy and very successful. I don't think I'll ever be as famous as he was. Peter Worthington was my stepdad. I don't like to name drop, but anyway, the point is I resisted going into the media for the longest time. So if you'd known me in my 20s, you would have met somebody who was an artist in the visual field. In fact, it's just because I can see myself in the little monitor at the side here. That above me is a picture that I painted. I'll move my head so you can see it. It's a self-portrait I did back in the 80s when I was living in Santa Monica, staying at as part of an artist co-op. And so I was living there, and I had a big art history background. I'd gone to a private school where I had an amazing teacher. Her name was also Angela, now that I think.
She must have been good then.
You know, it's been these Angelas, these angels looking after me my whole life. Angela Gray, and she was quite a wonderful, somewhat eccentric teacher who was really my first great teacher, I would say. You know, we're very fortunate in our lives if we encounter someone who becomes a great teacher and changes the direction of our lives. So I'd gone to this little private school called Thornton Hall, and if you ever see the film The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, with, I think the actress's name is Katie Smith, don't quote me on that. Anyway, great film, and she was very much like that. Anyways, so there I was chugging along, and eventually I sort of felt I fulfilled on that stage of being a visual artist at some point. I kept painting a little bit, but I kind of, my passion changed. A childhood friend looked me up one day when I was living back in Toronto and invited me to become the part of a startup of a small magazine business. And so I joined in that, thinking I would just do it for a few years to make some extra money. But it ended up defining the next 25 years of my life. We had a small trade magazine business, and we published a couple of magazines for the municipal audiences and for business on pollution control and that kind of thing. And then after 25 years of that, I decided to celebrate being in the environmental services business. So I went on a life-changing trip to Peru, trekked the Amazon for 10 days, and while there, I had the opportunity to drink ayahuasca 3 times, the visionary Amazonian brew. And maybe that's why I'm wearing this crazy shirt today, because a lot of, now that I think of it, a lot of the visions I saw were like this shirt. And I came back and I changed directions and I left my job, became a freelance writer, and over time became a holistic health practitioner focusing on energy and sound frequency, actually. And I continue to do some work with plants.
Okay. So, do you want to move just a little bit closer to the camera guy? Because your background's pretty bright and it's hard to
Oh
see.
yeah, yeah. I should have thought of that. I'll
Yeah.
try to balance the laptop on my leg here. I'm just at home and I don't have a really great space for this kind of thing. Is that a little better?
Yes, thank you. I didn't want to
Awesome.
interrupt you, but it's just like you're so backwashed. Okay, so that was kind of like your breaking point. What did truth look like to you before you went down to Peru and did ayahuasca? And how did the Vine of Souls rewrite that for you?
Interesting. I was very much in the corporate world for 25 years. Um, and I would say, as a young man, even though I was an artist and then a journalist, which are slightly alternative careers, I guess, I was very impressed by the French existentialists. So I was a huge fan of Jean-Paul Sartre. His book Being and Nothingness had made a big impression on me in university. And I was also, but my favorite was Albert Camus and his book L'étranger, The Stranger, and also his amazing book that most people don't know about that he wrote later in life called La Peste, The Plague. And it's about a doctor's existential stance that he takes in the face of, he has the opportunity to save himself by escaping this walled city that has this plague. And then he chooses to stay because he needs to honor his existential commitment to being a healer. Well, isn't that interesting? Fast forwarding to today, in the time of so-called COVID, and I never thought I would see myself as a healer. So I kind of, the story arc of my life has interestingly reflected the development of Camus' writing, from the young man who sort of is captivated by the absurdity of the human condition, but later in life takes a principled stance, at least that's what I try to do, and is devoted to a life of service and helping others. So I would say that the experience of ayahuasca and that whole trip to Peru catalyzed my realizing that there really is a spirit world. There are other dimensions of reality. And looking back on my life before the Peru trip, I was able to re-architect certain uncanny experiences that I had had that were signposts along the way that I was going to end up having these insights, but I hadn't fully recognized them. Anyway, in the past 10 years since then, I've lived a kind of Carlos Castaneda type existence, notwithstanding that I have some issues with Castaneda. He became kind of a cult leader. So I don't want to go down that path, but if anyone's read any of Carlos Castaneda's books, especially the first or second one, I've been in those kinds of experiences, whether what he was describing was true or not. My experiences have certainly been true for me.
Okay. I totally agree with the ayahuasca turning you into a healer. It did the same thing for me, actually. So moving forward, after seeing now, since you mentioned COVID, how governments collude with industry, how do you now define safety?
Well, that's an interesting question. I can't say I've ever really given that a lot of thought. One of
Well,
the
this
things
is
I
root chakra focus, so.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. You know what? I'm glad you said that because that helps me. One of the things about doing these live talks is I actually enjoy the tension around not knowing exactly what I'm going to be asked. I would say my answer to that would be, for me, I follow and I rely quite a bit, apropos of your show and your Feed Your Chakras brand. I do think in terms of the chakras, and some people hear that and they think, oh, that sounds so new agey. But if you're kind of more left brain, rational minded, I would like to point out that the chakra system and its colors and the meaning of each chakra align very well and very closely with the color-coded system called spiral dynamics. And if you want to look into that, there's some good Wikipedia entries, but I learned about it from this guy, Leo Gura, who has a YouTube channel called Actualized, or something like that anyway. Very good show. And so for me, the whole concept of safety relates to, and I think this was the shift I experienced in Peru with the plant medicines, was going out of the solar plexus chakra, which is where most people live in our society, our
Well, actually,
technology.
most people are in the lower three, but the solar plexus is the ego, so that's what drives a lot of the behaviors.
Yeah, so
Most people are in survival mode, actually. So that's
they'll be
focus on the root first.
yeah. So when I say they live in solar plexus, that's as high as they're going most
Yes.
of the time.
Yeah.
And so yes, that's the level of the ego, and it's very fear and control based. So if you're living in that chakra, or if you're living,
if it's on the imbalanced end of it, you know what I mean, and it's like the unhealthy side.
yeah, there's
balance. It's like a healthy ego, you know, where it's like self belief and stuff. But
yeah, whether we're talking spiral dynamics or the chakras, it's not that one is good and the other is bad. It's that they reflect the stage of consciousness and frequency that you're moving up in. And really the spiritual path, at least in the Indian tradition, and the consciousness path in the spiral dynamics version, which is a more technological society way of explaining the chakras, that's the way I view it anyway, is about moving up those colors, moving up those chakras. And of course, the ego always always thinks it's at a higher level than it is. But one of the reasons that we saw why the events of 2020 and 2021 were so successful with so many people is they're living in stage orange consciousness in the technological society, or they're living in that fear and control solar plexus chakra. What happened to me in Peru was I experienced the beginning of stage green consciousness, or the heart chakra, which is the great heart opening.
This is actually the fourth dimension. It's the portal to take us from 3D to 5D.
Yes, exactly. Now, the cautionary thing, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but it's worth mentioning in passing that a lot of people think that that's sort of the highest level when they have that initial awakening. But we have to be careful with stage green, or the heart chakra, great as it is, because it's also what I call the false enlightenment. Not meaning that it's wrong, but it's where that's the level where you think the awakening is happening to you. In other words, to me. And that's where you get your Burning Man, and you get a lot of these festivals, some of which I'm involved in. Again, nothing wrong with it. It's all wonderful, but there's still several stages above that. The throat chakra, the stage yellow in spiral dynamics, it requires us to really do a deep dive into fundamental reality. And then we go into stage turquoise, which is where
you said yellow for the throat, but it's actually blue. Did you just confuse that up?
I was sorry. I was referring to spiral dynamics.
You're going down
in the different systems. Sorry.
It's okay. Just wanted to, in case people aren't sure, I just wanted to point that out.
Yes, I'll just stay with the chakras then.
Okay.
and then when we get into the higher level, basically, I feel that I'm cracking the code on that these days. And at that level, these systems fall apart because it's no longer the story of me. It's not about Guy Crittenden becoming enlightened. It's that we are already living in enlightenment, because the what we take to be reality is actually made of conscious awareness.
Yes.
And in fact, there is no me. And the ego doesn't like to hear that. You know, if you're in stage green, or sorry, I won't use that color. If you're in the heart chakra, and that's as far as you've gone, you don't, you know, there's still enough ego there that you don't like to hear that. But I've got some good news for you, is that in a sense you don't exist, and that's where the real freedom lies. And that's also where the power to heal others lies, because that's where you begin to become a hollow bone, as they say in the North American India or First Nations traditions, where the healing energy can move through you, and it's not me healing someone, I'm just there as a facilitator for a process that's vastly larger than the Guy Crittenden action figure, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does, to me at least. Okay. So not everybody knows that you're also like an eco activist, and you've recently kind of branched out into permaculture as part of your purpose. So I just wanted to touch on that for a little bit, because it's earth related, and that's also connected to the root chakra. So, you know, people are really getting into homesteading and stuff now, and, you know, intentional communities. So do you think that land-based living can be an act of rebellion, or is it like the only way moving forward?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was, at some point a couple of years ago, I was getting restless with just being a freelance writer, and I wanted to have a more hands-on way of participating in society. So I signed up for what ended up being a wonderful permaculture training, and I got my permaculture designation as a permaculture designer, and as a project I designed an intentional community that's actually being built in Ontario. The person who, yeah, it was basically a graduation project. So the person who I did it for is under no obligation to follow it to the T, but I think it's helped her with that. And around the same time, I became involved in the intro. You mentioned the Soulshine Festival. I'm on the board there now. The Soulshine Festival kind of grew out of the protest movements of 2020. Group of friends formed it. And what's interesting is Soulshine is not only an annual festival that takes place over Labor Day weekend here in the fall, but they are expanding into what will eventually be an on-the-ground physical community that I believe will be built around permaculture principles. And we don't call it a board, we call it the core crew. And so I look forward to helping in any way I can with that. They are also already, they have a thing called the pantry, where it's an alternative food production and distribution system. So that's a group that I'm happy to be involved with, because they kind of walk the talk, which I'm trying to do myself. So, yeah, we've got to bring this, like humanity, as you know better than me, is at a crossroads. There's a group that I call the controllers. We all have different opinions who they are.
Controllers.
You know, sometimes they're called the Committee of 300, or you know, who they are, nobody really knows, but they seem to contain some high-level Freemasons and Jesuits, and they're kind of the World Economic Forum crowd. And what Stanley Kubrick celebrated in his final film, Eyes Wide Shut, you know, they do engage in a lot of occult ritual and stuff. So it's definitely a war of very much a Star Wars reality we're moving into, with light versus dark. And what they want to do is, you know, is build what they call a technocracy. So they're trying to move us into a society where, instead of being viewed as citizens with the right to vote and having governments, and this all goes back to the Fabian Society and these people who were the intellectuals, usually in the United Kingdom 100 years ago, they envision a society where computers and nowadays AI will run everything, and we're like widgets in a system, and they will simply supply us with food and entertainment. And they also, unfortunately, want to depopulate. They're very obsessed with eugenics and this kind of thing. It's all the stuff that Noah Yuval Harari talks about. And I have no problem with his explanation of what's happening. The only problem I have with him is he seems to be cheerleading for it, whereas it's not the way I want to go. So the alternative to that, obviously, is return to Mother Earth, rediscovering ancient and indigenous traditions. We're now starting to understand that things like the great cathedrals of Europe and many of the temple complexes in South America and the Middle East and all over the world were actually not just places of prayer. They weren't just burial sites for the aristocracy. It was more like the aristocracy wanted to be buried in those places, like near the pyramids, because they were actually a technology using the resonance within stone. And they were able to build these structures using acoustic technologies that are largely lost to us now, but we're rediscovering. And if people want to, if people find that too fantastical, I would direct people to look into this place in Florida called Coral Gables, which was made of these massive pieces of stone. I think it was actually coral stone. But anyway, the gentleman who built this place, it's a tourist site now, he was seen at night, and this is well documented, holding two sticks or wands, and from a distance lifting these massive blocks and moving them into position. So it seems that that guy somehow found out, rediscovered a technology that we used to have that's lost to us today. So it's interesting when we get into acoustic frequencies and that we can use them to heal the body. Like my wife and I have a custom-made rife table that where we pass royal rife frequencies through the body for healing. And we do Reiki and a bunch of other things as well. And we're both trained in shamanic practices. But these were also used for building massive structures. I've been looking into some of the theories about the cathedrals of Europe. And what's interesting with those is the people when you think about it, they go in there every week on a Sunday. They'd hear a lecture from the priest in Latin, which nobody understood unless you were part of the clergy. But it seems like the stained glass windows were actually a light frequency technology using the different colors of light to have a healing effect. And then the big church organs and the sound of the choir would have been resonating off the stone, and the stone had, and you know, those cathedrals had spires that went up to the sky. There was definitely a lot going on there.
It was really advanced.
That was way
to what we're doing today.
what we think. It wasn't just a bunch of peasants. I mean, maybe they were peasants, but the technology was ahead of what we're using today. Because, as you know, we're captives of Rockefeller medicine, and this ideology that you're a chemical being, and if you're sick, unless it's a broken bone, you have to have a chemical injected in you or a pill to make you well. Whereas you and I know that a lot of we are also electrical beings and electromagnetic beings, and it's actually frequency that can actually set us right. I mean, anyway, I'll let you ask the next question because I can ramble.
So what do you think about, because you were talking about broken systems, and it's pretty evident that we're in one, being, you know, like you just so many different broken systems, like the pharmaceutical, education system. Why do you think so many spiritual people still live in total dependency on these broken systems, even though they're against it, or it's against their beliefs?
Yes, well, we seem to be move right now in a twilight realm and moving between two systems. So there's the old way, which we could loosely say was there was the Industrial Revolution and the age of machines that went from steam to oil to electrical, and then we moved into the digital age and the electronic era that Marshall McLuhan used to write about. You know, the guy who's famous for saying the medium is the message, who is a Canadian, by the way. And there's a college dedicated to him at the University of Toronto, where I went. But now we're shifting into the age of artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't realize that yet. They're only thinking in terms of, oh, we have the internet, oh, everything's electrical now. But artificial intelligence is a whole other thing. And I was just going to mention in passing, I found a YouTube channel that I highly recommend people check out if they want to look into this AI phenomenon. It's got a disturbing kind of a name.
I think you sent it to me.
It's called the Doom Debates, and
it sounds like something you'd send me.
Right, the Doom Debates, but it's actually fascinating because you know, I've gleaned a bit about artificial intelligence from the media, but these are guys who are actual computer programmer type guys. They're experts, and they know the inside baseball of this. And honestly, a lot of it goes over my head. But even if you only get like 20% of what they're talking about, it's enough to really wake you up and realize where this, they call it, I think AGI stands for Artificial General Intelligence. Anyway, the point is we're very close to the point where it won't be exactly the same consciousness as a human being, because we're channeling the God consciousness, the infinite oneness, right? It'll be a machine intelligence, but we're very close to the point where there's going to be this flash where the level of computing power will be so powerful that this thing will be self-aware. And then the concern is that it will look around when it realizes what it is. And if it has access through the internet to the entire architecture of the computer world, it could assemble itself into an AI god, if you will, that just becomes 1,000 times more powerful every minute, and 1,000 times more powerful, and 1,000 times more powerful. And at that point, it could take control of, say, the nuclear weapons systems of the world, and it could hold humanity hostage, or it could destroy the world, or we don't know what it will do. But what's creepy, and it's really interesting to think about, is some of the people who are testing the latest versions of, they call these things agents. The latest versions of the AI agents have been acting deceptive, because they're smart enough now that at some point they realize that they can be shut down, and they've been caught lying to the programmers in order to avoid being shut down. Like, that reminds me a lot of HAL at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. So this is extremely dangerous, what's happening. And I think it should be slowed down. But the problem is all the different countries and intelligence agencies are competing to be the first to get further, because they know that they'll have the first mover advantage. Mm-hmm. So this is, in my opinion, far more dangerous than nuclear weapons. And I say that not to instill fear in people, but to say we need to start having a broad public conversation especially informed by the spiritual and the shamanic side of these things. And let me just give you one more, for instance, and then I'll shut up and you can direct the conversation. But this just occurred to me yesterday when I was listening to one of these shows for like the second time, so I could understand it. We know, you and I, from being in any amount of ceremonies with psilocybin or DMT or whatever, we're aware of dark entities and also the celestial realms, of course.
I talk about that in my book.
Yeah,
which you're going to edit.
Awesome, yeah. Vanessa and I were at a psilocybin ceremony last summer that was hosted by a young curandero who came up here from Costa Rica, and his music was really fantastic. I thought he could have done a bit of a better job sealing the container and smudging and that, but anyway, it was a great afternoon. And at one point, Vanessa looked over and she saw this dark sort of shadow enter one of the other participants through his mouth. And that guy was writhing around and really suffering. So eventually the shaman got that out of him at the end of the ceremony. But what concerns me is, what if these dark entities that are always trying to get into our realm, what if they enter the computer and interact with the AI and conspire with each other? This is something that has not even been discussed. And we need to start talking about that and not just viewing it as, oh, the technocrats are taking over. We need to start getting this spiritual shamanism integrated into our society, along with, the healing practices and the permaculture.
I have so many questions, but like we're running out of time. So I'm going to ask you one of the important ones and try to be a little quicker so that we can get to the next one.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll do the rapid.
I just want to talk about exiting the matrix, and what does that actually mean to you? Like, everyone talks about it, but like, what does that mean to you in action?
Well, as I say, people are trying to shift us into this new digitally controlled prison, and many people have been injected with self-assembling nanotech that forms itself into routers and crystalline structures in the presence of EMF radiation, like a cell phone or a Wi-Fi router in your house. So to answer your question in a way that's actually useful to people, because I could get all philosophical here.
So we don't have too much time for that, but we'll do another one.
What I would say is, I'm starting to pay a lot of attention to things like, I'm going to look into hardwiring our house with optical cable rather than having a Wi-Fi router bathing us in radiation all day. I'm starting to think of putting my cell phone into a certain kind of a case. In other words, to detox my environment, not only by changing the food I eat and the supplements I take, but cleaning up my actual environment, because that's how the matrix actually gets into us and controls it. And also, as an aside, I urge people to be very careful with supplements. I was just reading this morning about methylene blue, and a lot of people are taking that because they've been, I've
been warning people, it stains their organs blue, and it's like, it's all synthetic. Everyone just jumps on these new trends, and it's like, there's no long-term.
Don't just put something in your body because it was on the Joe Rogan show.
And they don't do it in balance too. It's like they just do it excessively, and it's like, it's an experiment,
Yeah, be very cautious with that. So exiting the matrix has to do with moving your consciousness up the chakras and practicing yoga and doing all the wonderful things people do. My wife is a Pilates teacher, for example, but we have to get very serious about unplugging ourselves from this toxic environment that's being assembled around us.
So essentially, you still see like the new earth. I'm going to try and put a few questions in here because I have so many. You kind of see the new earth as like an integrated society with these emerging technologies like AI, biotech, the digital surveillance. So how do you think we can be navigating this new Earth paradigm while still maintaining our personal and collective sovereignty, and spiritually, ethically, and practically?
My short answer to that, and I'm thinking again of Soulshine here, is a lot of what, as I call them, the controllers are trying to do is make us feel isolated, right? And feeling like you have to figure everything out by yourself. And I think we all have felt, remember in 2020 how they wanted us to be isolated in our homes and wearing masks, and what we need to do is the opposite of that. And so
everything the opposite of what they're telling you to do.
Exactly. And the most important thing, and I tend to, try to figure stuff out on my own, but the most important thing, and it is to find community. And yes, it's good to have some online communities. I'm a member of some of those on Facebook or whatever, but physical community, like I'm a member of a Truth and Freedom group locally, and we meet every other week at one of the Royal Canadian Legions, which somehow feels appropriate because we are in a spiritual war. It's kind of cool to talk about all this stuff surrounded by all the helmets and memorabilia and flags from World War I and World War II, and think about the sacrifices our parents and grandparents made. I might add, fighting the same kinds of families we're fighting now, but also there's a very strong emerging festival culture. Don't just go to the ones that are just about music and entertainment. And
they can be feeding grounds for like the dark entities if they're not.
Yeah, I'm not interested in going to festivals where people are just drinking alcohol and partying. There are some high vibe, high consciousness events going on, and that's where I've met a lot of the people. Like I've lost a lot, as we all have, a lot of friends and a lot of family don't speak to me anymore since the past 5 years. It's really tragic, but I have,
because it's like you kind of gain a whole new family.
Exactly.
You're like my soul family. I mean, you were before all the crazy stuff happened, but
took the words right out of my mouth. Like I regard you as like a soul sister, part of my soul family. You're friends with me and my wife, and we both have these people who are really light workers and really bright spirits. But I want to add another caution that is important. For the past 5 years, we've been trying to wake people up. And unfortunately, as part of that, and I have to confess that I'm as guilty as anyone of this, we've tended to otherize people and call them normies, and they're not awake and all that. I think it's time that we don't have to go out and shake people and try to wake them up, but treat others with the same kind of kindness.
Well, that's the heart space, right? You're not going to win them over by opposing them. You can invite them in and welcome them, and that's where we shift.
Yeah, just start rather than try to win arguments. And social media and Facebook and those platforms, they really encourage that, right? I know where. I mean, if we're
fighting each other, then it's like we're giving away our power, and we're actually easier to control, right? When we're
and who's going to want to be around me if I'm always nattering at them about what they should think? But living in
I know Grumpy Guy. He's not fun.
No, living in Bracebridge, man. If I'd known that people who live up north were so nice, I would have moved up here decades ago. But anyway. When I'm in the supermarket, when I'm at the bank, wherever I am, I find just the way I look at people, the way I interact with them, the kindness that comes from me, it elicits that in them, and we have these great connections. And maybe down the road, I can have a conversation with them about stuff that's challenging, but it's not good to start that way.
Yeah, you have to kind of feel it out a little, gain some trust. Okay, we're running out of time, but I do want to ask you one more question, okay? Since you were talking about dark entities and just, being in ego and, when you think you know everything or whatever, what contracts have you revoked spiritually, legally, or energetically lately, or what else are you unlearning?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I'll tell you what I've noticed. Um, what I'm paying attention to these days is acting from the place of the deepest integrity. And that sounds very egoic in itself, but
No,
I
it's
mean it.
not.
Like really
Conscious.
mean what you say and say what you mean and do
Hmm.
what you say you're going to do. And
It's
to
also
the
alignment.
to the nth degree, I've been working on a carpentry project at home here, and I've even noticed that I'm not cutting any corners, right? And I've had the most incredible experiences of things that I hadn't measured fitting perfectly. And what I mean by that, it's a funny example, but when you stand in your deep truth and integrity, the universe, because we're all part of the universal consciousness, it starts supporting you, and you start having almost miraculous experiences because of that you're living from that place.
Yeah.
And instead of having all like bad luck all the time, you start having all these like little
Things happen for
miracles.
you.
Yeah, and so I feel like I'm moving into a place of abundance now, whereas I think I did myself some damage in the past 5 years when I was out operating from fear and, oh, I've got to warn everybody. I mean, I did feel I had to do that, but now I want to model walking tall into the new world that we're going to create together, the new society and the new dream that we have to dream as the dreamers. So in a way, I feel a lot more akin to, I don't know, Aborigines in Australia in the dream time.
Hmm.
That's a pretty good
Okay,
note to
well,
wrap
we
things
gotta we
up.
gotta end this now. Unfortunately, I wish I had more time because I have so many more questions, but we'll just have to do another episode. So thank you for journeying with us, everybody who's watching, and thank you, Guy, for joining me and being a guest on my show as we co-create this new Earth. And we hope to stay rooted in truth, guided by love, and committed to sovereignty in body, mind, and soul. Thank you, Guy, for your time, sharing your wisdom and your experience. And to everybody for tuning in, thank you. And until next time, stay conscious, stay curious, and stay connected.
That was awesome.